migrant troubles in the Mediterranean, and more, all coming up on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, I'm at the airport in Panama City waiting on some friends to show up. I'm happy you're here. Welcome to the Hot Zone podcast. I'm your host, Chuck Holton. It's my job to bring your attention to areas around the world that are suffering from wars and crises and disaster, and especially those you're not hearing too much about in the mainstream media. There's so much happening in this world. Even a 24-hour news cycle is just too short to explain it all. And I kind of feel like the news we get spends way too much time focusing on the things that divide us. I'm already tired of hearing about the 2020 presidential campaign. Are you? And all the mudslinging and spin that goes along with it. Meanwhile, they're hurting people all over the world. But the idea here isn't just to tell you all the depressing things that are happening. It's to give you a chance to actually make the news better, little by little, by meeting some of the people who are being affected and then using the power of social media and modern technology to help you join me in helping those people that God puts in front of us. You can be a part of it by simply going to patreon.com/hotzone and subscribing, or by sending a contribution via PayPal or whatever. On that topic, I may have an announcement to make pretty soon that we're partnering with another organization, an aid organization, in a way that might make your contributions tax deductible. So stay tuned. I'll let you know as soon as I know something. All right. As summer weather warms up the Mediterranean, and they're having a real hot heat wave over there, the number of boats that are bearing migrants that are caught in distress has spiked, according to groups that are involved in running search and rescue operations over there. Advocates for the migrants say that European policies aimed at limiting the number of migrants reaching their shores are in fact making the route more deadly. And they may be right. But today I want to talk a little more about why that might be not such a bad thing. Even though it looks like there'll be fewer than 100,000 migrants coming into Europe this year, more migrants than usual have been leaving Libya for southern Europe in small boats, small crafts, over the last month and falling into danger along the way. Now, it's no secret that the quality of life in Europe, just like the quality of life in America, is much higher than it is in what they call the global South. Many countries in Africa and the Middle East, for example, are beset by wars and poverty. According to the UN High Commission for Refugees, in 2014, the number of people who were migrating across the Mediterranean totaled almost 250,000 people. Then in 2015, it spiked to over 1 million. The numbers have fallen every year since then, and part of the reason for that, I think, is the hard line that much of Europe has taken on irregular migration. In other words, making it harder to get there has had a positive effect. So Italy's hardline minister, interior minister, Matteo Salvini, just closed a migrant center in Sicily, he said was the largest in Europe. And during a news conference, he underlined the decrease in migrant arrivals since his populist government took office about a year ago. Salvini told reporters that the number of migrants in centers across Italy has gone down from 182,000 a year ago to 107,000 this year. Asylum requests have halved to about 30,000, he said. The migrant center in Mineo has been slated to close for years after it was found that there were large amounts of illegal activities happening inside that camp, including an alleged Nigerian drug trafficking ring, so that's good. It was also part of a huge bribery and kickback scandal that involved migrant housing. The camp at one point held as many as 4,000 migrants, and now it's closed. Salvini said that its closure would free up hundreds of thousands of euros a day in public money, as well as law enforcement resources. So the Interior Ministry figures show that 3,073 migrants arrived in Italy so far this year, from Tunisia and Pakistan mostly. That compared with 17,000 in the same period last year and 85,000 a year before that. So you can see it's a pretty steep decline and having an effect. Italy's cabinet has passed an emergency decree targeting migrant rescue boats because it says the rescue ships, which belong to several aid groups, are engaged in human trafficking. And I can see their point. I mean, undoubtedly, many of those who set off from Libya across the Mediterranean, they know that if anything goes wrong, there's a good chance that one of these aid groups is going to come to their rescue and pick them up. That means more of them are setting out on the dangerous journey than would otherwise. According to the UN, more than 17,000 people have died on that crossing since 2014, and almost 700 of those have died this year. Now, Salvini has refused to allow humanitarian rescue ships into Italian ports, and that's resulted in dozens of standoffs since his government took office back in June of last year. But some migrant boats continue to arrive in Italy on their own and are dubbed ghost arrivals by the media. Now, Salvini insists that every arrival gets counted, and he says they can be big, medium, or small, NGO, children, wooden boats, sailboats, paddle boats, I don't care. The Interior Ministry counts them all. There's no such thing as ghost ships, he says. Now, on the 12th of June, a ship called the Sea-Watch 3 tried docking on the Italian island of Lampedusa with 42 migrants on board, and it was refused. The captain, a 31-year-old German named Carola Rackete, was instructed to return the migrants to Libya, but she refused. The ship stayed in international waters for a couple of weeks until the captain finally decided she'd had enough. Rackete decided to guide the ship into port in the middle of the night on June 29th. In doing so, her ship trapped an Italian police boat against the quay, and no women driver jokes here. Salvini called it an act of war. I don't know about that, but he accused her of intentionally ramming the police boat. He called her a pirate, an outlaw, and a rich white German woman. That last part for sure is true, although I don't know what it has to do with this situation.
Hello everyone, good morning. I would like to give you a quick update from what has been happening here on the Sea-Watch 3. Yesterday we entered the Italian territorial waters without permission of the authorities. We declared a state of necessity because the psychological situation and the humanitarian condition has been worsening so much that I cannot guarantee the safety of the rescued people anymore on board my vessel. Now we're just off Lampedusa Island. The authorities have been on board twice. They just collected some paperwork, but they haven't given any clear indication as to when the rescued people will be disembarked. Later today, we expect a delegation of Italian parliamentarians, and we hope that that will create the necessary momentum to finally disembark everyone and get them to a place of safety.
Anyway, the young captain got arrested and threatened with up to 10 years in jail. But last week, an Italian judge sided with Rackete and said that as a captain, she has a duty to preserve the lives of the people on board her ship. Salvini was pretty spitting mad about that and claimed the incident was an attack on Italian sovereignty, which might be a little parabolic, but in reality, Salvini is facing the same problems we're seeing on the U.S. southern border. And like those we've seen in Panama and even in Colombia with their Venezuelan migrants, anything one does to make irregular migration easier, safer, quicker, or more comfortable has one inevitable result: more migrants at your door. The quandary all these governments share is how to avoid that while still affording those who do arrive with basic human dignity. I mean, if people are on a sinking ship, that's not the time or place to be deciding the political ramifications of saving their lives. The migrants know this, though, and do their best to take advantage of it. One strategy that does seem to be having some success is the program being employed by the Trump administration that is called Remain in Mexico. This is where asylum seekers are made to stay in Mexico until their asylum case gets decided. Now, there's a lot of people that are very unhappy about this, not the least of which are the migrants. Lucia Ascenso is a refugee from Venezuela. Her and her family waited for 3 months in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, and just to get a chance to make her asylum petition in Laredo, Texas. But she was stunned when she was told they were going to have to return to Mexico. As they walked back across the bridge, she said they hadn't thought they were going to get sent back. Her family was given a date in September to return for their next step in their process. More than 18,000 mostly Central American migrants had been returned to those border cities through the first week in July. And that's according to Mexican officials, so it could be higher than that. So this is what happens, and I'd say it's part of what's motivating Mexico to stop facilitating these hundreds of thousands of migrants transiting their country. The Trump administration has done everything it can to make it costly for Mexico, and this is one way that it's certainly it's working. Now, this guy's name is Aaron Mendez, and he works in a migrant shelter on the Mexican side of the border.
Si nosotros, yo considerando, ¿verdad?, si pudieran 50 albergues aquí en la ciudad, tampoco no serían suficientes, porque estamos hablando de...
He told the Associated Press that if they had 50 shelters like that in Nuevo Laredo, it wouldn't be enough because there are hundreds of migrants showing up every single day. And he wonders how long they're going to be able to end up, holding out and supporting all these people. After a Salvadoran migrant and his daughter died trying to cross the Rio Grande River a couple weeks ago, the Bishop of El Paso, his name is Mark Seitz, decided to stage a protest march across the bridge into Mexico to just register his displeasure with the current process. Now, here's what he had to say about it.
But to know that it's happening right here on our border where we live, that people are regularly dying because of the way that they've been forced to take more and more dangerous paths to cross, to know that children and babies are being put in situations that make them ill, that threaten their very life. To know that people and young families who are seeking nothing but a safe place where they can live and work, that certainly is a source of moral outrage and a clear contradiction to the gospel.
So he can be morally outraged all he wants about this situation. And so if you break it down, though, what he's saying there, look where he's placing the blame. Clearly, he thinks the fact that migrants are dying is the fault of the U.S. government, not simply throwing open the gates and letting everybody in. But these migrants, if they were truly fleeing violence and persecution, as some of them surely are, can make their case already and go through the asylum process. Now, that process wouldn't take so long. The United States of America grants more asylum claims than any other country in the world. And the reason they're dying isn't that our asylum system is broken. The reason they're dying is that there's so many people jumping the line. They don't want to use the system. And why don't they want to use it? Well, because in many cases, they simply aren't coming for asylum, and they know they won't get asylum. They're coming for a better job. In the case that sparked this bishop's protest, Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez, the 25-year-old Salvadoran migrant who left El Salvador with his wife Tanya and their 1-year-old daughter. Now, both Oscar and Tanya had jobs back in their home country. They didn't make a lot of money, but they made a living wage. They weren't coming to the U.S. because they were being persecuted. They did not qualify for asylum. They'd received a work permit in Mexico where they could have likely made more than they were making in El Salvador. But they wanted more than that. They wanted America. Well, nobody can blame them for wanting America. But when Oscar Ramirez decided to force the issue, rather than go through the proper channels to enter the United States, and put his 1-year-old daughter in the Rio Grande to cross illegally, then what happened after that is nobody's fault but his own. It's a tragedy, yes. We should mourn for that little girl especially. But it's a tragedy he chose. Now, the Bishop of El Paso entered Mexico and then crossed back into the United States with some migrants in tow, trying to help them to the front of the line. In so doing, he helped exacerbate an already overstressed system, and while he might get points in the media for his actions, they really amounted to nothing more than virtue signaling. And that's the truth. Now, he called the current system a, quote, clear contradiction of the gospel. Now, I'm not sure what part of the system he's referring to. Surely he's not referring to the part where thousands of Border Patrol agents put their lives on the line every day to rescue people like Oscar Ramirez who are crossing the border illegally at stupid places in stupid ways, like the Rio Grande. He can't be referring to the BORTAC agents who have rescued several thousand migrants from the desert this year alone in Black Hawk helicopters that cost $25,000 an hour to run. And I can't see where it's a contradiction of the gospel for us to be feeding, providing shelter for, and medical care for hundreds of thousands who have crossed into our country illegally. I'd like to think he was referring to the profane amount of money, tens of billions of dollars, being spent in these efforts that has to be essentially stolen from American taxpayers every year. Because taking money from one group of people without their consent and giving it to another group of people isn't charity, it's theft. But I get the feeling that that's not what the good bishop was talking about. All right, I hate that this has to be such a politically charged issue. America is supposed to be the land of opportunity, and opportunity gives people the ability to be charitable. We're still the most charitable people group and nation on the planet, bar none. But it's too easy for politicians to pretend that they're being magnanimous about helping the global poor and the poor migrants when they're not doing it with their own money. They're using your money. So just remember this: all charity must be personal. We can work together to help others, and that's one reason I started this podcast, to leverage the magic of modern technology and make it easier for you to be personally involved in the lives of the neediest people on earth at their worst day. So thanks for being a part of that. I'm leaving in a few days for a really long whirlwind trip across the globe. I'll be flying more than 55,000 air miles over 3 weeks. I'm going to Nigeria, South Africa, and Afghanistan, Lord willing. So I'd appreciate your prayers for all those moving parts and for my sweet mom, who is just beginning her chemotherapy in an attempt to prolong her life a little bit. So thank you for that. I really appreciate you all. I'll see you back here again tomorrow, and thanks for watching The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.